Greetings, Cinema Appreciation class. I hope you're doing fantastically well. Greetings from the Star Trek Enterprise set for the new Star Trek movies. I hope you all are doing wonderfully well. Today we're going to be talking about lighting, which is probably the most intensive part of film shooting. And if you ever go on a film set, many people say film sets are actually, they seem exciting from the outside. When you get on the film set, they're also quite boring as you wait for the cinematography or the director of photography set up all the lights to do a shot, and then if the lighting goes off, have to reset up the lights for the shot again. It's the most intensive part of the filmmaking process, outside of probably editing. So, as I just mentioned, the cinematographer, also known as the DP or the director of photography, he's responsible for arranging and controlling the lighting of a film and also the quality of the photography here. So, think about all the different choices that had to go into this particular shot from The Exorcist, from the lighting of the interior windows, the absolute pitch blackness of everything else, the dark, solid figure, the light and how high up that had to be so it doesn't actually disrupt and give you anything else on the figure, any details. The idea of this dark figure walking into this ominous space, this misty light that shows up, the absolute outline blocking here, including the pointed aspect, this kind of darkened tree over here, the black lines over on the other side, that the light is only coming from this window here, as if this giant mansion, only a piece of it is open, almost like it's the haunted part of the house. All those decisions are decisions that the DP or the cinematographer has to deal with to set a mood and an ambiance for the film that makes it believable for all of us today. Now, we're going to look at some different types of lighting, and we're going to teach you how to do these lightings so that in your own film creations in the future, you can do them as well, and also what the different film creations mean. Let's start off with over here. We're going to start off with high key. High key basically means there's very low contrast between any of the images. So you're going to see the details, but you're going to see even the details that are underneath the lovely garlic cloves that happen to be here, underneath that beautiful pink, right in here where my cursor is. See how that's the shadow. That's very little contrast. They're almost shadowless. We're going to have ambient light, meaning we're going to have light everywhere. It's going to be overexposed. We're going to have a front light that is really our dominant light, and the emphasis is going to be very soft. In low-key lighting, we're going to have dominant high contrast that show up. So if you look at it, you can see beautiful light right here, but then it disappears in the shadow. We have no idea what's going on back here, and so we can fill the screen with surprises. The accent is absolutely going to be on the form itself here. It's going to be direct light angled right at what you want to highlight. The background is going to be dark and black. Oftentimes you'll have a rim light where you just get a little bit. See how you only see the front side of even the arm here. That's going to be a harsh way of setting up light. Now, high key, as you can imagine, we're going to use for romantic comedies. We're going to use for musicals. And then if we look over here in the low key, that low key light, then we're going to use for drama, for horror, particularly aspects of horror where we want a surprise figure to come up. And that's where we're going to look. So it's the basis, should mention low key, when it gets invented later on during Citizen Kane, the filming, one of the reasons why Citizen Kane is one of the most important films of all time, it actually is going to birth us into things such as Casablanca and film noir. Looking at the difference, note, these are both the same film. Anyone recognize the film? Good. It is Hitchcock's Rear Window. And note, at the very beginning of the film, we have our figure here, Jimmy Stewart, in high key lighting. So note, happy, friendly neighbor, go to visit, not threatening at all, kind of a normal 45-year-old guy who happens to be laid up with an accident. Give it 2 hours, drop the lighting key, and you'll notice immediately that he appears a little bit more sinister. He appears like he's in the shadows, almost watching over, just emerging from the shadows. So the impact of lighting actually has a significant impact even on an individual scene in a movie. Now, when we go to do high key, here's how we set it up. So if you ever want to do high key lighting, this is exactly what you do to kind of show all the low contrast, shadowless, ambient, overexposed front light. You're going to put your subject in the middle, and then you're going to do what's called a key light. whenever we do these, the key is always the highest light. So the key light is the most powerful light. So let's say that's our 100% light. When we're doing high key, we're going to have the light very much here dominating right in front of our subject. Note, we're going to have a fill light, generally at about 50 to 60% off to the side. We're going to have a background light, probably of 40%, and another background light of 40%. So that means we are literally surrounding the object with light. So if this is casting a shadow, the key light, the main light, is casting a shadow here, we're going to counteract that shadow with the background light. We have the fill light on the side that's casting a shadow slightly in the backside of here. We're going to have this that cancels it out. So it really is filled with this beautiful ambient light, and it shows up everywhere. Again, used for comedies, romantic comedies, musicals, where you want people to see everything. One use of the early high key is in The Wizard of Oz, where almost everything is lit up as they're running around until we get closer to Oz and closer to the witch's castle, in which case we actually drop some of those lights behind. But here you see this ambient light. It's like highlighting almost everything. The only shadow we get are really underneath the awning. And we could have kind of got away with that by doing high key with an underlight, but they didn't go that far within it. Show a little bit of shadow and depth on where things are. Until high key or for scenes like this. Look how high and positive it is. Look, there's light everywhere. I will mention, Wizard of Oz is one of your top 100 films of all time. It was not commercially successful when it first came out. It was too far advanced for its time. And it is the birthplace of all the different costumes here. No set really had ever had costume and makeup departments before. This is the film that sets that up in modern day filmmaking. You see how positive everything is. The opposite then is true for low key. We want to have very high contrast between the lights and the darks. The accent on the form, direct light, dark black backgrounds, rim light, and harsh. Note you're going to have a key light, and you may not have any other lights. So when we do low key, it really is the key light is going to be the dominant light. So at 100%, you might even lower this down and kind of cover part of the light or make it more like of a pinhole by putting something in front of your light so only part of the light comes out. You may use a little bit of a background fill in whatever aspect you want to highlight, but no, it really is not filled with the light at all. And so where you get the camera is right off, right in front. So you are going to get these harsh shadows that show up in the darkness. So low key, one of the great films of this that starts to use low key is going to be Casablanca. You'll see the darkness that shows up. So this is natural lighting outside. We're not quite, but a lot of this scene, a lot of this film is actually going to use that lower scene, particularly when we get to our nighttime scenes when the bar scenes are taking place.
Refugees lured into this danger-swept oasis.
So this is really our first film noir.
But they're all trapped, for there is no escape.
See here, get the dark shadows as you're running in.
Background is woven the story of an imperishable love.
See the shadows that are showing up.
Saga of 6 desperate people, each in Casablanca, to keep an appointment.
You see the dark shadows everywhere.
I was willing to shoot Captain Rhino, and I'm willing to shoot you. All right, Major, you asked for
See
it.
one light right on the right. So whenever in the shadows in the outside of night, they're basically inventing the idea of using this. So note, you see you have actually a light here. This is low key. You have a light on her face, but then you also have one backlight.
How much I stay?
Right here you have a light up top above them, just in this little area, but then you actually have a backlight. So this is a very advanced way of using low key.
More about you.
And again, when you look at the film such as this is the same film. Look at the difference. High key, that wonderful woman is actually having no issues. These are her friends. She's out. She's the center of attention. Low key, that woman is very much in trouble in terms of, these individuals are out to harm her, maybe even sexual abuse she would think of. when we think of the images of high key versus low key here. Note we can do the exact same thing when we look at animation. We have high key over here in Andy's room. Over here, look at the low key in Sid's room. So the idea of this danger, this darkness, this foreboding, these animal creatures that come out from the bed and you don't recognize them. One of the most common forms of doing lighting is this. So we have low key and high key, and now we're going to play around with them. The next one up is called Hollywood lighting, which is also called three-point lighting. It's an arrangement of key, fill, and backlight that provides even illumination of the scene, but it does require some shadows. So the light comes from three different directions to provide the subject with a sense of depth in the frame, but not dramatic enough to anything deeper than light shadows with the subject. So basically the setup is this. Say we have our camera here. We use our key light. Remember, key light is the highest light. So sometimes at a 45-degree angle above the subject. That is so that it actually shoots down and we get a little bit of shadow even underneath the chin to show 3-dimension. You generally have a backlight up here, and you have a fill light that's 50 to 75% of the key light that's going to show up here. And you film right in front. That means we basically get a very nice rounded image, a 3-dimensional image. We basically say that when we use Hollywood lighting, we're filming beautiful subjects in their most beautiful, because we're showing the 3-dimensional even depths of the body that actually shows up here. So that's what we're doing when we shoot Hollywood lighting. So for example, this is Hollywood lighting. See how there's a little bit of shadow on Rex here? And actually, in fact, if you do Hollywood lighting spectacular well, you're going to get a triangle. Oftentimes it'll appear occasionally underneath the eye. Here you can see that triangle in the highlight here as well. That triangle underneath the eye is even called Rembrandt lighting. And the artist Rembrandt was considered one of the great masters of light. And so this is where we actually borrowed the idea from, often using 3-point lighting. A lot of celebrities are shot with this. And so this is what we're looking at when we're looking at 3-point lighting. Note the difference between here and high key, which sometimes can be confused. In high key, we would have one more light right over here that would actually highlight and get rid of any of these shadows. And the same would be true here. We wouldn't see those shadows. We wouldn't see this shadow over here. We'd have one more light off to the side to actually illuminate for even. But this actually gives them a more 3-dimensional, more symmetrical lighting, beautiful people. And note how it changes when we look at light, just so we have an idea. So let's start up top is the type of light, and below is where we angle it. And note the difference to show you how we use light and how light impacts us. Remember, when we think about light, we think of references even to the Bible, where going back to Christian thought and almost every religious thought, our sensibility and the way we experience the world is so based upon visual acuity and visual eyesight that when you can see things, you assume generally goodness. When things are hidden and dark, like in horror films, we assume the negativity that shows up. And so we have this strange kind of comparison between these two as we're looking at them. And so light, generally good, dark and evil, like we think of hell, and the kind of the hidden part, because we so rely on our eyes, we see as bad within the process. So we look at this to begin with, these lovely fruits. When we take the dominant and we shoot straight on, that's actually called the key light. See how you have the highlight of form that takes place right here. And so that basically illuminates the major subject. When you do this, note you get shadows and background. So you get some 3-dimensional that shows up. But note how sharp we go from light to dark with very little mixing over here. And so it does appear almost like a cartoonish flat object because we have the high brights and the dark shadows all in the same images. And note the background doesn't appear to add anything to the shot. Now, if we take the fill light, so now we still have the key light, and we take a second light, and that second light note is going to be over here, our fill light, generally somewhere between 20 to 50% intensity. Note, we get a very beautiful rounded object where, rather than the dark shadow, look how dark it is over here for tonality, look how it actually gets softened a little bit. So we can either put the fill light over here or the fill light over here, depending upon who we want to emphasize. Note, we still get the roundness and the shapes. We get a little bit more variation that shows up, but but we also get a gradual transition from the lights to the dark. Now look what happens by simply putting, now this is the same thing. We have the dominant light and the second dominant light, or the key light and the dominant light. All we're going to do is put a backlight behind them. Note, as soon as you put a backlight behind them, it separates the subject from the background. So all of a sudden now we've created another depth plane. So here we basically have the foreground we care on, the middle ground and the background are the same. Middle ground and the background are the same. Now all of a sudden we have the idea of the foreground, and we've basically created either a middle ground or a background depending on how far it is. So we have two different planes now that we can play with just by adding that backlight. So when we do things such as Hollywood 3-point light, this is considered one of the highlights in terms of lighting that's ever been put on camera. This is the very famous, I'm the king of the world scene from Titanic about 20 years ago. So note the beautiful lighting that's showing up here. And the question for you is that, how do you know this is Hollywood 3-point lighting and not just a high key light like you saw in The Wizard of Oz? All right, good. We see the shadow on Kate Winslet's face right here. And so if it was Hollywood lighting, how would we have gotten rid of that shadow? Good. We would have hung a light right up here. Good. And the drawing works well. Hung a light right up here, probably about a 45-degree angle, to actually shoot down to make sure that that particular angle doesn't miss. Or we could have hung a light up here about 60-degree angle right above them to highlight that as well. But note, everything else is in this beautiful soft focus that we'll talk about later called sfumato, to make kind of beautiful people fall in love, become one body, one pairing, and that was invented by Leonardo da Vinci. Note, when we use Hollywood 3-point lighting, we also use it basically in terms of advertisement as well. So here, we're celebrating Burger King hamburgers around the world. And note, you have that 3-point lighting. That 3-point lighting allows for a little bit of shadow. We clearly have a backlight because it separates it from. We're going to use it to sell cars as well. Here you can see 3-point lighting, right? You've got the dominant, ironically, off at the side rather than in the front. And that's really to highlight the diagonal aspect of the car. One of the things that we will talk about in terms of linear elements in film is that linear element here lining up, see how it runs right in the front? That linear element, because it's diagonal, adds an energy. And so we want to sell cars or shoes or things that are about energy and getting up and doing something. An activity will generally have them at a diagonal angle or a diagonal line to the main area where you're going to be looking. That adds an energy to a particular image. So it's just a manipulation. And this works actually all around the world. It doesn't matter whether you're in China, the United States. This is the idea that shows up. Even note the stormtrooper himself is at that diagonal angle in this particular ad. Note, we know it's 3-point lighting because if you look at it, we have a dominant over here. We clearly are going to have a backlight, right? You can see the shadow of the car, but everything else in the background is all lit up. So there needs to be a lighting up the background, showing us the distance and how far the car has come as well. And yet we still see that shadow on part of the body that's not important. But again, beautiful people, beautiful car, showing that 3-point lighting helps sell it. Another form of lighting that's been recently invented and really used successfully is called high contrast lighting. And this is aggressively theatrical. It infuses the film with a sense of tension, visual anguish that shows up. And note, can you pick out where the lighting? So I'd like you to draw where the light is coming from here. What's the key light? How many backlights, or do we have backlight? And do we have any fill lights? All right, so the dominant light, ironically, here is going to be, ironically, a backlight. Look at the beautiful lining up that shows up here. Good. Note, we are going to have probably a 40% that's found of a light that's not the key light, but is a subsidiary or dominant light, that literally a fill light that's right in front of him, that probably is only at 30%, just to highlight his eyes. We're going to have an overhead light that literally gives you this beautiful highlight right on his hands. right? And if we set that right, that will also light up this part of the back of the car with this beautiful lane that you're picking up. So this is what's called high contrast lighting. We often use it to show the battle of good versus evil. We also have backlight. Now, backlight is fun because it can do one of two things. It can lend a spiritual aura like two bodies melding together, like they're falling in love in this lovely aspect. But if you have an aggressive protagonist or enemy that's coming at you, it can be incredibly negative. Like in this image from the backlighting and the underneath coming basically out of the sewer or the boiler room in Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare Before, A Nightmare on Elm Street. So what type of lighting is this? Note, look at Glenda's face. Here, all except for here, where you see a little shadow. This is going to be good Hollywood lighting. Type of lighting is this. All right, you've got the dark foreboding. You've got that beautiful background lighting. So we do have backlighting, but we have other lighting as well. So this is going to be high contrast where this guy's coming to kill you. Type of lighting is this. Look around. Note, you'll see shadows that are starting to show up. Shadows here. Shadow here. It's not all lit up. Shadow even right here. Her as she goes through that orgasm we talked about last time. We'll see this later on in acting. This is a great ad-lib scene that kind of just developing. She was not meant to go through a complete orgasm. And note, the women around her did not know what was going to go on in the act. And so they were amazing. One of the great lines in film, this woman here right afterwards, the actress comes over that's playing the waitress and says, "What do you want? Or what will you have?" And she says, "I'll have whatever she's having," after she just had an orgasm. So this is going to be Hollywood lighting, 3-point lighting, backlighting, high contrast lighting, right? Really showing the back. But this could also be considered low key, but this is low key contrast because it's good versus evil. And here, one of the interesting things is I'd like you to pause the video and go through and count how many different lighting sources are showing up here. It's pretty remarkable in this scene. Any guesses? There you go. Look, the key light is actually right above. You have all these lights pointed up, showing you tiny little details, making you think you're looking at natural light, which you're not. This is completely a studio set made up. So if you count them, I think there's 17 different points of light or 18 different points of light. It's kind of remarkable. Thank you, Steven Spielberg, for making this film. Fantastic film. All right. So any questions we have? Any questions at all that we have on lighting in the different kind of conditions? Because that's one of the analysis you're going to do this week. No? Great. Have a wonderful day. Bye, guys.